Travis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm just talking about Strange Tales New England today. It came out in PDF last week. This is going to be an off-the-cuff, not really scripted discussion. You can go to DriveThru or go to the website to follow the link. It's available at DriveThru RPG, but we have a link at the website. And it's a modern horror RPG. It has a bit of Lovecraft inspiration, but it's largely what I would call sort of a spiritual, psychological horror game that kind of it continues the Strange Tales idea of Monster of the Week, but more in line with weekly investigations into anomaly accounts, like paranormal type stuff, like X-Files type things, but with kind of a Exorcist vibe to it. So there's like a strong degree of there's again, similar to Strange Tales of Song Ling. Actually, the two big threats are spirits and demons, but they take a more a more European and Western form here. So it's very much about being things like spirit mediums, exorcists. You can also be like a charlatan or like a combat expert and things like that too. I'll get into that in a bit, but again, modern horror RPG uses the same system as Strange Tales of Song Ling, but it's kind of been modified to fit the concept. I've been working on this one for a very long time. I'm going through the document right now, and so I'm just going to kind of talk about what I see to prompt thoughts. And again, before I begin, I do want to say the industry has changed a lot, so we're not going to be able to put the book into distribution. There is going to be a print book. You might have to be a little patient with the release. I just have to fix a few things to get the file ready for the printer, and that can take a while. Then I need to get a proof copy and all that stuff. So I don't know how long that's going to take, but you can pick up the PDF now. And in order to keep the print costs down, I basically couldn't go into distribution. I could have gone into the distribution like I always do, but we would have had to raise the print price. And so not going into distribution might be a really negative decision for this product. So if you do like it, just make sure you let people know, that you spread the word, because that's really what is going to make or break a game like this. Strange Tales of Song Ling was in distribution, but this one is not going to be. That helped me to keep the cover price down to an amount that I was comfortable with. I wasn't comfortable with the amount. I understood why it had to be where it needed to be. So it wasn't anybody's fault. It's just that the industry has changed. But I wasn't comfortable with the number that it was going to have to be, and so. So again, that means no distribution, which for RPGs, that's big. That means you're not going to see it on a lot of online sales sites. You're just going to have to follow the download links on our website and everything. And so that means we really will be more reliant on word of mouth. So if you like it, do spread the word if you can. And I would just say reviews are a really big help. Blog posts are huge. YouTube videos are obviously big. Forum comments are great, anything like that. But the really big ones are reviews, blog posts, that sort of thing. When you get a review up on DriveThru, that's always useful. And so I'm looking at it right now. The cover is brilliant. It looks a little different than some of our other covers because we really. So number one, the cover and the interior artist by Jackie Musto, who pretty much does the covers and interiors for all our stuff. And the maps are Francesca Barrell, who also does the maps for all our stuff. And so the cover is brilliant, and we wanted to do something a little different in this book. I wanted to do. I don't want to get too deep into the art directions here. So I'll just say there was a particular look I was going for, and in order to get that, most of our books the covers have focused more on characters. This one we kind of needed to focus more on landscape, and so this is one of, it's kind of, again, there is a character in the image, but this is much more of a landscape image. I think it's effective. I have an alternative version of the cover that I'm eventually going to put up somewhere, and the difference is, I would say, the way that I thought of them is they were kind of like Pepsi and Coke. And apologies to any Coke or Pepsi fans that take offense at this analogy, but if you know anything about the Pepsi Challenge from back in the day when I was a kid, The Pepsi's sweeter than Coke, and so it often did better in taste tests. And again, this is what I've heard. I don't know how accurate this is. I haven't I think I read one book on this ages ago, and I don't even remember if this was in there. But Pepsi is sweeter than Coke, and so if you're just doing a sip taste test, Pepsi will often do much better than Coke. But it's not. You might get a different reaction if you have people drink the whole thing, and so I found that the other cover was a little bit more like Pepsi. It was like kind of pops at first, but this one, even though it's more subdued, I feel like it's a little bit more timeless. So I preferred this one, but they're both nice for different reasons, and so you know that one's like a little bit brighter. It's got more color to it. And I think that probably would have been a better move for like a thumbnail on the drive-through site and stuff. But the comment that made me choose this one is one of the players and play testers, when I was showing them the covers, they said they liked this one because it was like they could see it being a poster on their wall. And when I thought about that, I was like, yeah, the other one I might not want as much as of a poster on my wall as this one. So that's why I went with this one. It felt like a more long-lasting image to me. And it's really the same image. It's just about the coloration, which really does make a huge difference. So I'm just going through the credits page and everything. And again, this is off the cuff. I might be long-winded and meandering, so I apologize. I just got a little time before I have to get my wife, so I'm just going to be doing this in that period here. So there's an introduction. I won't get too into the introduction here. One thing that I will note is there are quotes at the beginning of every chapter. And they're usually attributed to people. One of the quotes, the attribution is a bit suspicious, but I wanted it for a particular reason. But there's one quote in there that I know, there's a bigger story to the quote, but I needed to sort of tell the story I wanted to tell with the quotes. But we don't normally do this, and one of the reasons why is I think it can come off as pretentious, and I was really worried about that with this one, especially because the concept of this one could also come off as pretentious, and some of the style could come off as pretentious. But at the end of the day, I just felt that it was fitting, and I felt that it helped kind of establish the mood. And also, another reason was there are references to specific people in the game, and because some of the quotes include those people, I think it just helps prepare people's minds for those it kind of gets that in their head already. But it's also just the kind of game where I think the themes are pretty important. And again, not themes and then you're not going to play this game and be exploring literary themes. That's not what I mean. But just every book that we do does kind of have like core themes. You know what I mean? And so the core themes of this, I think the quotes really help with that. It just kind of helps set the mood and set the tone and everything that goes along with it. So there's a note on religion, obviously, because it uses real world religion. And I don't think that this is really should be necessary, but I will say, we have things based on real prayers in here. None of this is meant to be real theology, or none of it purports to be an accurate representation of those things. I think if you want to learn about those things, an RPG is not a good place to go. And I think especially in an RPG that's kind of heavily inspired by things like The Exorcist, you take it all with a grain of salt. I don't like doing things that veer into edutainment, because I feel like when you do that, the concept can weaken. The need for the thing to be accurate and educational can steer you away from making it gameable and fun and all that stuff. And so I try to be accurate in terms of like the research that goes into the history and things like that. But at the end of the day, this is a game. This is a horror game, and so that's the main thing. And so if you want to learn about these things, there are much better places to go and get like really good information on that stuff. So that out of the way, it gets into system basics. Again, this is just the intro. We just kind of give a broad sketch of things, and then the setting basics. And I guess maybe I could read a little bit here. I'm not the best the best at reading out loud these days. My eyes are not very good, even my own words. So, Strange Tales is a game of paranormal investigation, of ghost and demon hunting. It is set in a present-day New England where demons, spirits, anomalous cryptids, and other dark entities prevail. I'm just glancing ahead to see. Okay, so evil has always had a presence in the world. Man has long been subject to demonic possession and ghostly hauntings. New England history is plagued with such strangeness. Something wicked permeates the soil and rolls like fog through the twisted landscape. Yeah, I think I can read the next paragraph too. People speculate why the region is pervaded by supernatural. Many point to the events that consecrated its granite's bedrock with blood. I apologize for my pronunciation here, such as the Salem witch trials of 1692, which extended well beyond the borders of Salem village and Salem town, or the bloodshed of King Philip's War, often cited as the genesis of the Bridgewater Triangle. The Bridgewater Triangle is an important location in the book. Some say it began with an earthquake that struck in the region in the 17th century. In truth, its past abounds with curious episodes, and the explanation may be that the world is not what it seems. So that sort of sets the premise of the book, I think, pretty well. It doesn't give you too much information, but it gives you just enough to kind of understand. Then we have some more beautiful artwork from Jackie Musto, character creation, and so this is where things kind of get into the nuts and bolts of the game. Again, this is very much like Strange Tales of Song Ling. So for people who don't know Strange Tales of Song Ling, it's a system that's sort of derived from Ogre Gate, but where it veers away from Ogre Gate is in two ways that are really crucial. One, it's a much, much simpler version of the game. It's meant to be more like a Moldve or like a Beckme style, like just very prioritizing imagination over mechanics type of a game. And it also has character paths, which are a lot like classes, something Ogre Gate does not have. There are other things too. Strange Tales of Song Ling is more Monster of the Week. Ogre Gate is much more of a sort of a sandboxy kind of RPG. But those are the two main things that really separate it. And here your choice for paths are Charlatan. I really like the Charlatan. It's an interesting character. Obviously, they're people who are kind of using chicanery to present themselves as spirit mediums or psychics when they really aren't. And so these are people who, their biggest asset is often their wealth. They're very good at becoming minor celebrities and things like that. So it's an interesting class or an interesting path. People really seem to like it. It's the kind of path that there's always a certain personality that seems to gravitate towards it. I thought they were a very interesting path in the playtest. The combatant is just kind of a necessary character. That's sort of more like the Wandering Sword in Strange Tales of Song Ling. So that's like a former soldier or whatever. They're just good at fighting, and they are really good at fighting. We made a point of I was thinking about how compatible these games are. I'm pretty sure Song Ling and Strange Tales of New England are compatible, but in terms of the classes standing toe to toe, I'd really need to run some campaigns to see, because I don't know how the combatant compares to the Wandering Sword. The combatant might be more effective, and so we just wanted to make like a very solid combatant class in this one. And then Spirit Medium. This is a very this path took a while to really get right. And I'm happy with how it came out. And they can basically, they're like spiritualists. They can talk to the dead. They can, let me just close that window so I'm not getting notifications. They can talk to the dead. They can sense spirit. They can do fortune telling, things like that. Obviously, and again, if you've ever seen The Conjuring, that would be a very good encapsulation of like Exorcist and Spirit Medium characters working together. And the next path is The Exorcist. This one obviously based on movies like The Exorcist, but not strictly just The Exorcist. I actually did a lot of real world research for this one. I read a lot of books by exorcists. There's a bunch of them. And again, this is not an accurate real world depiction of exorcism by any means, but I wanted to get the feel right. So, don't use this to research, but I did want to get the feel right. I think we got the feel. And so exorcists, they obviously have like the rite of exorcism and stuff like that, but they get special abilities like sense demon, anoint the sick, and they also get prayers. And prayers are really sort of an important part of the game. And they're real prayers. They're based on real prayers. And again, that's one of the reasons why I have that caveat at the beginning, because I'm basing them on real prayers. And a lot of these are real prayers I grew up with. And so I didn't want to mislead people that these were comprehensive explanations of the prayers or anything. Do you know what I mean? These are very gamified versions. And so then the next thing is the expert. That's kind of like, like a tech expert. They're a good character path. People seem to like them. They have some interesting abilities. They're as they level, they can make better inventions and stuff. And so, one of the characters that I have in the book is actually an expert who's a vampire hunter. And he makes like a special suit that can protect him against vampires, that sort of thing. So then we have rules of play. Those are very similar to the Strange Tales of Song Ling. I think the only big difference is there's spiritual corruption rules in here, because this has that element. And there might be an additional optional rule. This one has 3. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head how much Strange Tales of Song Ling had. And in addition to that, there's also, we always update the skill roll illustration. This one's been illustrated, to fit this game. This is maybe my favorite illustration of our die rolls. I kind of went for like a classic 40s, 50s horror movie look, and Jackie nailed it in this image, and I quite like it. And so then we have defenses and skills, which again, that's in Strange Tales of Song Ling too. All of the basic defenses and skills, some have been modified obviously to fit the modern era, with things like demonology, knowledge skills and stuff. And there's also a score called Salvation, which is that's the thing that protects you against corruption. I won't get into that here, but just note that that's a very important ability, or an important stat, I should say. And then we get into powers, and powers is where you have the prayers. So you have the Hail Mary, you have the Apostles' Creed, the Lord's Prayer, things like that. The rite of exorcism is in there. Again, it doesn't actually give you the prayer. It's not like a it doesn't. The prayer isn't printed in there. It's just a description of what effect the prayer has when an exorcist uses it. And so then there's magic. And magic is divided into non-malignant and malignant magic. And, this is kind of a blend of some things from grimoires that I found, some things that I remembered from... I took a medieval history and witchcraft course ages ago. And some of the stuff I remembered from the books in that course, but also things from grimoires, but also just Hollywood stuff. I was kind of looking for movies like Warlock, things like that. I wanted that kind of a vibe with some of the powers. So it's by no means is this a if somebody's like an occultist, they might be disappointed with some of the stuff in here. It's meant to be kind of a I don't know. It's a blend of cinematic with some things based on the research I was doing, and so then we have weapons, equipment, and specialty items or special items. This is pretty standard, similar to the Strange Tales of Song Ling. The only big difference is there's a lot of ghost hunting equipment. So there's like EMF detectors and pucks and Hack Shack radios. These were things. I have a cousin who is into ghost hunting, and so I don't really know a lot about ghost hunting. I used to watch the Ghost Adventures show, and I would, things like that were of some interest to me. But he's the person that I really learned most of this stuff from. And so then we have unique and rare items. I won't talk about them. There's one in there that I really like. It's a little bit of an Easter egg. Hopefully people will get it. Then there's grimoires, books, and Gnostic texts. These are, again, the Book of the Lilith, the Book of Amit, the Devil's Book. I wanted to include the Devil's Book. I don't know. I thought that would. There's definitely like stuff dealing with demons and all that stuff is a very big part of the game. But I also have stuff that's like, well, I don't want to spoil anything for people, but there's some interesting entries in here. I'll say that. Then we get into the GM section, which is called Campaign Settings and Running Adventures. Now, I've done a ton of these over the years. I'm always unsatisfied with them when I'm finished. It's actually very hard to write a good GM section. This is something I've been getting better and better at. Ogregate is probably my favorite, only because of how useful I think that GM section is. This is another favorite. This is one that I really like how it came out. Again, I just wrote the book, so I don't know how I'm going to feel in 5 or 10 years because, anytime you put a book out, it's your favorite. But I really quite liked how this section came out. But ultimately, what's going to prove how good it is how people receive it. So, we'll see what people say. Because they're the ones that judge whether I succeeded in doing what I was trying to do here. But I look through it and I feel good about it. I feel, like it's a nice GM section. I don't want to get too into the concept because there's spoilers that might affect somebody's campaign. And so I'll just say that this delves into a lot of the concept stuff in the setting too. But it also, gives you advice on how to run horror adventures. I think that's really one of the strong points of this chapter. I've done so many horror campaigns at this point. I think I've narrowed my own personal set of principles down to things that are very tangible for me, and I basically just use those as my basic points of how to run a horror RPG. And so but again, we'll see what people have to say. I like the chapter. There's also a number of optional rules. I highly encourage people to look at the optional rules because some of them are they're optional, but we're really encouraging you to use them. So you check them out before you decide not to use them. And again, there is a premise to this game, but the premise can be ignored. I wanted it to be able to be run as a straight horror game, but there is a premise, and it's up to the GM and the players if they really want to pursue it. Well, I guess it's more up to the GM, but it's up to them if they want to really do it. Then we get into the Strange New England Gazetteer, and this is, this took a while. It started out as just a small list of entries, 12 or maybe 16. I think it was 12 entries. And it became clear to me, because when we did Strange Tales of Song Ling, after the rules, the bulk of the game was the 4 adventures that we included. And I realized that this needed to be something where you'd have material the GM could use week to week more. So I needed a large number of locations, and I wanted them to be based on they're not all based on real things, but a lot of them are. And so there's High Rock Tower is a real place. It was right around the corner from me, and I used to go there all the time. And there are plenty of other locations that are real places, like the Wood Island Lighthouse. Now, some of them I take liberties with, some of them I take fewer liberties with. It really depends on the particular legend and lore. So do keep that in mind. Don't read this and think, if there's a real legend in here, this is the best source of information on it. I would encourage people to go look at books like, I think the name of it is Passing of the Strange. I mentioned it in the Influences chapter, but there's a bunch of books on New England paranormal stuff. I would say check those out if you want the sort of more detailed descriptions. A lot of these are also just made up, and so I blended them, and I think I did a pretty good job. I think it's kind of hard to tell if you don't know them, which ones are ones I made up and which ones are long-standing New England legends. And so again, this is kind of it's a Massachusetts-centric version of New England, and even more than that, it's a North Shore, Massachusetts-centric vision of New England. So a lot of the Gazetteer deals with the North Shore and things like that. I will say, when I was researching it, if you get books on New England history, one of the jokes that I heard, because I would write to people, write to professors and stuff, and ask them for good sources, what's a good source on New England history, and the joke that they all used to say was that most histories of New England are just really histories of Massachusetts with a little bit more about some of the other states. And so that was often the case. So, so in a way, it's because I'm from Boston, but it's also because a lot of the source material is just very skewed towards, the Massachusetts Bay Colony and all that sort of stuff. But there are, if you look at the map, a lot of the stuff is in Massachusetts. There's also stuff in Vermont, New Hampshire, some stuff in Maine, Connecticut. But yeah, it's definitely a Boston centric campaign setting. And so we go over the notable towns and the North Shore, all that stuff. I talk a little bit about the geography and everything, and things like the transit system, which is a whole thing here. And then there's this beautiful map that Francesca Borrell made, and this setting was made in such a frenzy because I was making the entries, but I also had to order the maps, and so some of the entries I just was like, okay, I know I want to do this one, so I'm going to put it on there, and then I have to make it after I have the map. But there was a point in this where it's like I had to set everything in stone, so everything was just kind of being created like crazy. And so, but this has a map of New England. One thing I want to point out, and I don't think people outside of Boston will understand this, but I think people from Boston will look at the map and they'll shake their head. If you look at a map of Massachusetts and Boston, it really looks like a series of concentric half circles wrapping around Boston in larger and larger circles. These are like bands of like highway that encircle Boston. And those are like, you look at a map and you know it's Boston because you see those. And again, I do apologize for my my phone beeping. I got a text message. But those bands are identifiable to Bostonians. Those are not on here. And so I think a person from Boston is going to look at this and be like, what roads are those? So there was a reason for that. The map was too cluttered when I tried to include those. They would have been very accurate in terms of representing Boston, but then if I have a whole map of New England, it just didn't work. So that's why that's not there. My apologies to the Bostonians who see this. And like I have I-90, I have some of the other roadways, but you don't have that like 128, 95, 495 wrapping around. And those are important cultural borders too sometimes. So just keep that in mind. And then after that we have cults. And so the way that the map is organized is it's got places, it's got cults, it's got boogeymen in the damned. And so we get 10 cults, 10 boogeymen in the damned. Just to give you an example, Cult of the Oblong God, The Witches of Freetown. I mean, cults are obviously, there's a Lovecraftian influence, and cults are super important. And so these are the cults were very useful. There's also boogeymen in the damned, and these are kind of more like your Freddy Krueger type characters in the setting. A lot of, I think most of these were made up. There's a couple that aren't, or they were based on real history. But I really took like Leatherman's a real thing. I think Ebenezer Fletcher was based on. Yeah, that's a real one too. But Leon Chesney's totally made up, which you can probably tell just from the name. And that's a reference to Lon Chaney. And so then there's the Strange Places. This is the Gazetteer. This is where I have 33 locations that I've described. These are adventuring sites. Some of them are a thing called Haunted Landscapes. Those are kind of like Grimm's from Sartorius, if people remember that. And these are just like haunted locations or strange locations, often with a big evil at the center of it that you can go and venture to. And the idea is the players are probably paranormal investigators, and week to week they're picking a place to go. And so the idea and how I ran this was the players would look at the map and they would choose where they went that week. And what that sort of did is I had enough material that there was stuff prepped. Each entry is like a page, sometimes two. But it also forces the GM to think on their feet and adapt, because obviously a page is a good amount of information, but it's not a complete adventure or anything like that. So the GM kind of has to very quickly assemble an idea of what they want to do. And so, so it's meant to be very kind of free form and all that stuff. But you can also do more planned weekly adventures. So if you wanted to do stuff that had more structure to it, that's totally fine. And you could even do it with these sites. You just might do a little more prep beforehand. That's absolutely fine. Again, there are 33 locations. One of my favorite ones, Danvers State Hospital. This is a real location. and it's an old mental hospital. It was probably the inspiration for Arkham Asylum. Most likely, it was. For people who don't know, Arkham is basically Salem. You'll hear a lot of different opinions about this. Arkham is basically Salem. Kingsport is definitely Marblehead. And one of the things I noticed when I first read Lovecraft is I would read it, I would recognize what he was describing as, a local play. Like I remember reading The Festival, and again, maybe something tipped me off before I read it. I don't know. Maybe there was like a little intro, or maybe it's even mentioned somewhere in the text. I don't think it is, but I knew it was Marblehead. And again, this is this building. I would encourage people to look up Danvers State Hospital. It's a gorgeous neo-Gothic, mental hospital. It's not the reality of it. When I started looking into the history, really, because I'd always heard about it, I knew about it, but when I really started looking into the history, it wasn't as sinister as the building appears or as people sometimes remember. I mean, it certainly probably had a lot of, questionable practices because of the time period, but it had a lot of lofty ideas, and unfortunately, it was turned into apartments. So if you go there now, which I did not too long ago, and it's located in Danvers, Massachusetts. And for those who don't know, Danvers is Old Salem Village. So Danvers would probably be part of Arkham in terms of source of inspiration for Lovecraft, because he used to come here and visit Salem all the time. But the facade is still there. Portions of the front building are still there, but a lot of it's been torn down and just turned into apartments. It was supposed to be preserved, and so that's why it was kind of a sore issue around here. I don't know all the details, so I'm not pointing fingers or anything. I just know that people were told it was going to be preserved and it wasn't. But one thing that's good is, and this might have been part of a compromise, I don't know. When you go there, there's a whole historical display that they give you a lot of information about this place, more than you normally get when you go to something like this. So I was pretty pleased with that. There's also a website you can go to find out about it, but we have a really nice map, of Danvers State Mental Hospital, and it's a very cool entry in the book. So again, that's just one example of something that's based on a real place in the setting. There's also the Crystal House Art Museum, which is not based on a real place. In fact, it's more inspired by something like Bird with the Crystal Plumage than anything in New England. But I wanted to have one kind of like Italian horror movie type thing in here. And just to be clear, if you read that entry, you probably won't see the direct connection to Bird with the... It's not like the story from Bird with the Crystal Plumage. There's just one moment in the film that inspired the thing. This is another real one, the Old Stratfield Cemetery. It's a very interesting one. I elaborated a lot with it, but it's based on a real incident, which was a very, very interesting one. Kingsbury University, that's kind of my Miskatonic University, and it's pretty important to the setting. I also made up a town too, and so then there's the monsters chapter. This is a pretty important chapter, and again, it's similar to the one in Strange Tales of Song Ling. I've been getting better and better at making these monster chapters, I feel, and so this is, I think, a very solid monster manual section. I would say Ogregate on been really good. Sartorius was good too, but I was still working out the formatting with that. So even though the entries, I think there's a lot of creative stuff there, some of the mechanical presentation I'm not as satisfied with, because we really figured out how to do the stat blocks with Ogregate, and with Sartorius we were kind of doing this very ungainly stat. Like, gave you everything, but it was ungainly and it took up a lot of space. And so now we have much better stat blocks, which make the monster chapters so much easier to write, and to organize as well. And so, the liches in this, I think, are very... I like the liches. They're one of my favorites. And they're New England liches for sure. They're definitely and I would say quite Lovecraftian. There's mermaids, much more nefarious than the Disney movie type mermaid. You have poltergeists, pugwudgies, which are like local trickster creatures. They're kind of like goblins almost, but they like to lure people to their deaths. Pawn spirits, giant rats, red-eyed dogs. Red-eyed dogs are a local legend. The Scattergamooch, which I don't know. I just feel like it's a Native American legend, but the name sounds like it should be said with a New York accent. So it became a running joke anytime they came up. There's different types of vampires. The default vampire is more like Nosferatu. I wanted a really bloodthirsty, evil, ugly vampire. So that was sort of the default. But we do have vampires more in the style of Dracula from like the movies and the original novel. And also a very New England vampire. There was a series of vampire panics in New England. And so we have a type of vampire in there that's based on that, and it's all kind of bound up with consumption, and so you'll see if you look at the entry, but they're very different. I don't think you probably have not seen a vampire quite like this before. Then we have werewolves, and I wanted like howling werewolves. You know what I mean? There are different types of werewolves because I was actually doing a lot of research on werewolves and looking at like medieval accounts. So there are werewolves that are more based on that. But there are also, just good old-fashioned horror movie werewolves in here, too. There are witches, which the witches are very much based on, like the witches that you would see in medieval lore or New England lore about witches. So if you think like The Witch, the movie, that's kind of the concept of witches here. There's also women in white, which are another local legend. And those are kind of interesting, actually. And another one of my favorite, the Wretch. I don't know what it is about the Wretch, but I just love them. And then we have a chapter called In Purgatorio Personae. This is our NPC chapter. And again, one of the things that I was paying homage to was the Black Box of Ravenloft. And so they have a section there called Who's Doomed. So this is kind of our Who's Doomed section. And that's why it has that title. And again, I think these are all very interesting characters. Edgar T. Ashby is one of my favorites. I won't ruin who's in here, but there are people in here that have connections to historical things and stuff like that as well. But it's mostly new characters. Then there's the Monster of the Week scenario. So here we have a bunch of adventure seeds, and they're all pretty interesting. And each one has like a potential plot twist. You don't have to use the plot twist, but if you want to kind of if you just want to spice up the adventure a little bit, the plot twist is maybe a way to do it. That's sort of the idea. And then there are 2 sample adventures. So the first one is a much more very straightforward horror haunted house type adventure. This was one I just wanted to be able to. I wrote it with the intent of illustrating what the game can do, what the game's themes are, and all that stuff. And so this one is, I think, pretty easy to run. I think if you read through it once, you'll probably be able. I always tell people to read through it twice, but I think this one you could read through once and run it, not a problem. And it's I think a very good adventure. This one got a really good response. The second one is a little bit more experimental. It's called The Fatal Portent. I really like this adventure. I think it's a very good adventure, and it has how would I describe? I don't want to give too much away, but it's about a haunted painting. I'll just say that a haunted painting that is predicting disasters, and the players are investigating it, and it's good, but it's a little bit unorthodox. It takes a little bit of time to I think you need to read it a couple of times to really grasp it. And so I wanted to make sure I had at least one adventure in here that was just much more straightforward. So that's why there's 2 adventures. Originally, it was just going to be this one. And then I realized this one's experimental enough that I'd rather have another one in there, just so that people have a more sort of something that fits their expectations more of what they would get in a book like this. And so but that one was a lot of fun to write, and that one was very fun to run. And so then we have a section called Talking New England with I think one of the more interesting Edgar Allan Poe quotes out there. He was born in Boston. We have a statue of him here, but he's obviously not as strongly associated with Boston as he is with other places now. So, but he had some experiences here, and there was he got a little irritated at the Boston crowd at one point, and so we have a quote about that in there. And this is really just a guide to pronunciation. I couldn't get everything. There's a lot of stuff like I wanted to do every town under the sun. I couldn't do that, so I just did a handful of towns to give people an idea of how unorthodox the pronunciation is here. Massachusetts and New England are kind of famous for the words do not sound the way they're written, and that it really, it throws a lot of people off, but I've noticed people on the West Coast get really thrown off by it. I think because, because there's a lot of Spanish language names on the West Coast. So, but it was something that I encountered when I lived out West for a while. And I think that the way that New Englanders pronounce written words is very different from how it's done on the West Coast. The joke that you will hear from people on the West Coast when they're talking about New England pronunciation is that they pronounce things right and we pronounce them wrong. But like, just to give an example, there's a town called Billerica, and the way that it's spelled is Billerica. And so a lot of people see it and think it's Billerica. It's not, it's Billerica. Or they'll look at a town like Peabody and they'll say Peabody. It's Peabody. If you say Peabody, people here lose their shit. And I don't mean to swear, but it's just something where it's like it bothers people. I don't care how you pronounce it, but I thought that people might want to know like what the local pronunciations are. And there's a few other towns in here that we mentioned, but really it's just kind of a primer. I wouldn't be able to do every single town. In fact, I think there's somebody just sent me a thing from The Tonight Show or something where Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, and I can't remember the host's name. I should be able to remember it, but I can't. But they were all pronouncing every single Massachusetts town name. I think they might have got a couple wrong. I can't remember. I watched the whole thing, and a couple of them sounded a little bit suspicious to me. But basically they got them all. I mean, there are town names I can't pronounce around here. You know what I mean? So, but that's just how they just don't sound the way that they're written a lot of the time. And so that's the point. And like another example is the HAM suffix. Sometimes it's pronounced and sometimes it's pronounced ham, and it's not very clear when and where. You just kind of know for being around here. I've seen rules that people have for when to do what, but I am not confident in saying that it's when you would do it. And then I have a note about the Boston accent and the New England accents. And then I also have a note about specific terminology. So just like slang terms. I was almost not going to include this chapter. It's a little more fun than some of the other chapters. It's also very, very short. It's more of an appendix. But I thought that this would be helpful to people if they wanted to, if they just wanted to kind of use some slang to give the locals a little bit of local flavor. So I thought I would throw this in there. And then it's followed up with the maps and the character sheet. The character sheet, I think, is really good. I really quite like the character sheet. And the maps are amazing. The maps, so let me see. I'll list off the maps that we have back here. We have the Danvers State Mental Hospital, the Chandler House, the New England map, the North Shore map, and the Crystal House Art Museum. So there's quite a few things to kind of go through. The Chandler House is very interesting because that's for the first adventure. I based that on real housing architecture from the region of New England where that is supposed to be. It's like in the central Massachusetts area, and it's architecture that like you see all the time, or here and over there. And And so I think it doesn't look like a lot because sometimes these are very unassuming type buildings, and I gave it a little bit more spice. It's an old fashioned mansion which really just looks more like a house. But then he has a sprawling gate and a mausoleum property, so it kind of gives it a little bit more sizzle, I suppose. The New England map is great. I've already kind of explained that. And the North Shore map, I think, is very helpful just for people who don't know the North Shore. The one thing I will say is we don't list every town on the North Shore. We just list the important ones. And we don't list them the way that you would see them. They're kind of, there's a dot and then the name of the town. So it's kind of more like it's not giving you the boundaries of the town, which I think people should, even though these maps are good, I would encourage people to look at real world maps just so they kind of have a sense of what the boundaries of the towns are. And also, which towns we did not include on the North Shore map. And so that's everything. Again, I know I've been going on for 45 minutes, so if you've made it this far, congratulations. But I've been meaning to do this video. I sat down to do it a bunch of times, and I was just not feeling up to it. I've had a lot of health problems the past 3 or 4 months, and it's really slowed me down on a lot of fronts. So, again, check out Strange Tales in New England on Drive-Thru. Let people know about it if you're interested, if you like it, and if you do enjoy it, a review is very helpful. And so I hope people like this game. This game has been in development for a very long time. There were a lot of things that happened during that period. We had to move and all these things that kind of just kept throwing wrenches into the whole process. And so it's finally out. Which I guess means I can get back to Ogre Gate. But there are some things I want to sort of explore with this too. So I'm fortunate enough to have 2 campaigns every week. So if I want to, I can kind of go back and forth between games. So I will talk to you later. Until next time.